Hi, this is my Bible Studies playlist, and this episode is number 21. And we're in the book of Acts, and it's 28 chapters, so we'll be on it for a while. And we're taking it slowly enough that I can explain, not just whisk past a lot of these different issues that come up. We've completed 2 chapters already. The first chapter, Luke, who's the author, has described kind of what went on during the 40 days after Jesus was raised from the dead, and then right before he ascended into heaven, and then his ascension itself, and then how about 120 people, the original disciples plus minus Judas plus Jesus' family members and others prayed because Jesus had told them to wait until the Holy Spirit came, and that would be on the day of Pentecost. That takes us to chapter 2, which just most of chapter 2 is the day of Pentecost. And Luke does not try to explain everything that happened that day, but he does give us a pretty good portion of what Peter said. Still probably, not even the majority of what Peter said that day, but the gist of his remarks and how he described to the people that what they were witnessing that day was a fulfillment of biblical prophecies that had been in place for centuries, well over 1,000 years, many of them. And he was explaining how the crucifixion that probably many of them had heard about when they had most recently been in Jerusalem for the Feast of Passover, because that's when Jesus was crucified. And Peter's explaining, yes, Jesus was crucified, but he rose from the dead. Many of us saw him, touched him, ate with him, drank with him, and over a period of 40 days. And it was many convincing proofs, Luke said. So people were, Peter was explaining to people what all this meant. And of course, what happened in this generation, the generation of Jesus, the generation of his apostles, it was the most consequential of any generation in human history, with the possible exception of the very first one, Adam and Eve. And today we're going to pick up after Luke described Pentecost, he describes the days after that and how people were coming together and listening to the apostles' teaching and breaking bread together and just enjoying this good news and sharing this good news and ruminating upon this good news. And so that brings us to chapter 3. Luke doesn't say exactly when this happened, but it happened in those days right after that day of Pentecost, that monumental and momentous day. So let's see what we find here. Acts chapter 3, verse 1. Now Peter and John, you recall Peter and John were partners in a fishing business, and it wasn't just the two of them. John had a brother named James. He was involved. Peter had a brother named Andrew. And then they both had fathers. I don't recall if Peter's father worked in the business, but it seemed that John's and James's father did. So Peter and John, along with James, John's probably his younger brother, were kind of like the 3 that Jesus spent the most time with of the 12 apostles. Jesus, he had many disciples. We're never given exact numbers in the Gospels for the number of disciples. Disciple means student. From among those, Jesus chose 12 apostles, and we'll talk more about in the course of this study about why he chose 12 for that task. And they were to be with him and to learn from him and to be so that they could be a witness to what he did during his public ministry, and so that they could imitate him after he had left the earth and would be managing things from heaven. So anyway, this is Peter and John, 2 of his closest disciples. And it says they were going up to the temple at the 9th hour. You'll recall there was only one temple in Israel. God had given the instructions for it through David. Prior to that, Israel had what was called a tabernacle, which was really sort of like a mobile temple that Moses had constructed when the Israelites were in the desert right after they were delivered from slavery in Egypt, but before they went in the Promised Land. And this temple in Jerusalem was the center of the nation's, not just religion, but because it was specifically was a religious nation, it was the center of all national thought and activity. And it says they were in the 9th hour. My Bible note here says down the bottom in this tiny little print that that's 3 p.m. So the Romans and the Jews counted numbers differently. We don't need to go into that now. But the 9th hour, by Jewish reckoning, at that time would have been, 3 in the afternoon. And it was the hour of prayer. So people would gather at the temple to pray at this particular time. So it sounds like Peter and John were going there to pray or to speak to the people who'd gathered for prayer. Jesus had told them to go into all the world and preach the gospel, and they wanted to do a thorough job of doing that right there in Jerusalem before they started hopping around all over the place. And make sure they covered the people there, covered Jerusalem before they went out to the outlying districts and then beyond Israel into all these other countries. So on their way there, in pursuit of their mission that Jesus had given them, it says, and a man who had been lame from his mother's womb was being carried along, whom they used to set down every day at the gate of the temple, which is called Beautiful. So they just gave a name to the gate in order to beg alms of those who were entering the temple. And so he just needed to beg, he needed to beg for food. So he had friends who would carry him there so that he could do that. Verse 3, when he saw Peter and John about to go into the temple, he began asking to receive alms. But Peter, along with John, fixed his gaze on him and said, "Look at us." And now I don't know exactly how they did that, because obviously the guy had been looking at him, and that's why he was sticking out his hand. But Peter, along with John, fixed his gaze upon him and said, "Look at us." And he began to give them his attention, expecting to receive something from them. Well, he was going to receive something from them, all right, but it wasn't what he was expecting. It was something much, much more than he was expecting. And so often that's the way it is with God. We go to God expecting something or hoping for something, and we find out that he's not giving us the thing we want, and sometimes we're confused initially. But if we keep paying attention, like Peter asked this man to do, if we keep paying attention, we'll come to realize that if God is offering us something different than what we asked for, it's because it's something better than what we asked for. Usually far, far better than we could have asked for. In fact, in this particular case, I'm not going to leave you hanging. They're going to heal the man and not just give him a little bit of money to make another day. But we'll read about that in detail the next time we get together. That's long enough for this one. Thanks for watching. More importantly, thanks for listening. That's where the real value is. God bless.